All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Dave, me, and Nick here. We're doing our 2022 preview and prediction for the Oklahoma Sooners. Been a pretty wild offseason, Nick, for the Sooners. Even as a USC fan, I think this is the team that probably came out with its best future. Landing Brent Venables as head coach to replace Lincoln Riley. Spent the past decade at Clemson as one of the top defensive coordinators. He stuck around, waited for the perfect job, and this was it. Jeff Lebby comes over to be the offensive play caller as well. Spent the past 2 years at Ole Miss. And then it's, looks like there's going to be three guys that call plays. Venables will be there to help him out. Ted Roof, Todd Bates, Jay Vlad, the DB coach. How do you feel about this coaching staff revamp that they really didn't want to do, but they're forced into? And I think they came out with an even better future, to be honest.
Lincoln Riley bails to the West Coast. They grab Brent Venables, a guy who waited forever for this job. It seemed like this is a perfect fit. I absolutely love the fit here. I think Venables is such a great defensive coordinator. I think we'll see that this year with Clemson's potential defense as they may be regressing a lot. I think Venables' defense will have a lot. He'll have a lot of control over the defense this year. I think as they transition, he'll sort of be in charge for a decent amount of time as they kind of sort out which one of these three defensive coordinators will take the lead reins here. I like picking up Lebby from Ole Miss. That offense is high flying with Matt Corral at quarterback. I like this a lot. I think this is a great coaching staff to start with, and I think they can develop a whole lot in Norman.
Retaining Bill Bedenbaugh, the offensive line coach, that's also a very underrated retainment that the casuals probably won't talk about. But when we get down to the deep and the gritty here, that's a massive addition to he's been around a long time. He's a great offensive line coach, and that's a unit that needs some work. So looking at the offense though, Dylan Gabriel, they had Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams transfer out, Nick Evers, they landed him 9th ranked recruit as a true freshman. Gabriel comes over from UCF, reunites with Lebby though. Bulk of his numbers here came over 2 years at UCF. 8K yards, 70-14 touchdown to interception ratio. Completion rate of 68% in 2021. Only played in 3 games. He got hurt and decided to transfer out. Good arm motion. I like his footwork. Throws a heck of a deep ball. He can throw off platform. Hockey breaks down. His skills as a runner. There's a lot to like here about Dylan Gabriel. I'm very interested to see how he performs here at the Power 5 level.
70 touchdowns and 40 interceptions is a very great ratio, interesting ratio to see from Gabriel. I love what he has as a talent. I get a little concerned with the injury. I think he might have potential to get banged up again this year, which I would seriously hope that does not happen to him. But I get concerned when you see a guy that has the injury history like he does. I think this is a good fit for Oklahoma to start with him. Definitely transition in the future. I like what they have. Bring in Nick Evers. I think Evers is definitely the guy for the future here in Oklahoma. I'd like to see him get some reps this year, maybe get a couple garbage time minutes as well, see what he can do with that. I think he has the best potential of the quarterback on this roster, and Gabriel is certainly a good transition guy to sort of set this team up and start them off in this new era without Caleb Williams or Spencer Rattler.
Looking at the running game, it was kind of disappointing last year. They averaged almost 187 yards per game on the ground, but it didn't feel like it. DeMarco Murray's the coach. He has a nice little group here. Eric Gray stays split, 713 yards and 4 touchdowns and 107 touches. He's dynamic. He's a dual threat guy. Again, he kind of disappointed last year compared to what the expectations were. I thought this whole running game was pretty disappointing. The O-line was a big reason, of course, but Marcus Major only played in 2 games really last year, 5'11", 222. He's a power runner. Hasn't played much past, but oddly enough, he's had 2 solid bowl games, had 110 in 2020, had 50-plus yards last year. And also like Devonte Barnes, top 10 running back in the class of 2022, 203 pounds. Also more of an inside worker like Major, but I think they have a solid trio here for a Sooner legend in DeMarco to work with.
I like DeMarco Murray being the coach of the running backs group. I think it's great to have a guy like him back on campus. What a legendary running back he was at Oklahoma. I like Marcus Major. I expect him to step up this year. I think he has some serious potential. He showed it in flashes in the bowl games, like you mentioned, 5.5 yards per carry last year in his very limited appearances. I like to see Major step up and take a huge step forward this year.
The wide receiver group was one of the best in the nation last year in terms of was 4 of the top 6 pass catchers from production. Doesn't include Austin Stogner. Lots of similar players, though, are gone. They lack size tremendously. That's one of the biggest drawbacks. I don't see many physical imposers here. Farouk at 203 pounds, he's their biggest in terms of weight. Theo Weiss at 6'2", he's their tallest at 200 pounds. Those are the best guys they have in terms of size, though. That nothing there is too impressive. Dontario Drummond had plenty of it at Ole Miss, though, and he was a star, so they don't have that luxury this year, at least for Jeff Lebby. Marvin Mims, though, they were fortunate enough to retain him because everybody else bolted. He's a deep threat. Speed, he's a leader in yards the first 2 seasons here at Oklahoma, 735 of them on 32 receptions, 22 yards per catch. He's phenomenal. The aforementioned Theo Weiss didn't play last year. He can make plays downfield. Cody Jackson transfers out. The talent, I'm not saying it's poor, because I like the trio they have, even though Drake Stoops right now is kind of listed as a starter, but this group is very depleted from at least what it was a year or 2 ago.
Definitely is a downgrade of this team. Marvin Mims staying was very important. A lot of guys fled, but he ended up staying around 705 yards catch last year, 5 touchdowns as well from Mims. I like what he has. I love his potential. I think he's a very talented wide receiver. I expect the ball to be thrown to him a whole lot in the early part of the season. Drake Stoops is an interesting player as well, listed as starter currently on the depth chart I'm looking at. I don't know if he'll hold down that starting position. 191 yards last year, about 11.9 yards per catch and 2 touchdowns in 8 games for Stoops. Interesting to see if he will stay in that starting position.
Brian Darby, I believe he's up to 210 pounds now, so I guess that'd make him the biggest in terms of weight, but still nothing's too overwhelming here. I'm not very impressed with the size. The depth is not all that great. Very interested to see what Levy does. Alluding back to this offensive line, Beaton sticks around. They lose 3 starters. They weren't great anyways. Wanya Morris, the big-time transfer from, I believe, Tennessee, was disappointing. He might not even start this year at tackle. Bray Walker, 6'6", 356. He's a former 5-star there on the interior. He might not start either. It looks like Chris Murray might anchor that down. McCade Mittaler, he comes over from Cal. He's a veteran at left guard. Andrew Rams, probably the most exciting player at center. Expected big things from him last year, and I thought he performed pretty well. Overall, though, I'm not too impressed with this offensive line. Robert Congle, another guy who's a veteran, but he's probably going to be a backup role, rotational guy. How do you feel about an offensive line that I'm very iffy about?
I like Anton Harrison, the left tackle junior, has some decent experience as well. The depth, definitely there's potential depth here. I think Bray Walker could be a nice guy to maybe sub in at some point, maybe get him some reps. I like him, former 5-star player, as you mentioned. This is definitely a poor offensive line by the standards of previous Oklahoma teams. I definitely think this is a bit of a step back from teams in the past. I like some of the talent here. I think some of these guys have good experience. Most of these guys are juniors or seniors, so they definitely have some reps under their belt. I'm just a little concerned if they're going to be able to work together and build a good offensive line.
Overall, Jeff Levy, he loves to run the ball, so it'll be hard to see, if this offensive line doesn't get better, then that's going to be tough to do. I think overall, looking at these numbers, 39 points per game, 450 yards per game, I think it's expectations that that's going to get a little worse. I don't know how bad it will be, the regression that is, but, this offense has some impressive parts. Dylan Gabriel in the running back room, the wide receiver group, offensive line, not as much. So we'll see what happens here. Long term, I think they'll be all right, but for the short term, I'm not very impressed with this offense. But I don't expect them to have much fall off. I think they'll be top 3 in the conference in yards per game. So we'll see what happens. Looking at the defense, Ted Roof, 6 different stops in 6 years, 6-45 as a head coach. I'm not sure why I even have to say that, but it's just an interesting stat I found. He's had a lot of different stops here. Brent Venables seems to like him, though. So even though he's had some, interesting areas in his career, I think this was a good spot for him because Venables likes you, then that's probably pretty good. The defensive line was pretty disappointing last year. 33 sacks isn't a bad number, but it was a decrease from the year prior and what I expected from them. The Iowa State game was the only time they were elite. They showed up in that game. I expected them to all year long. The run defense was fairly good. Only 4 games of 150-plus yards allowed, 1 game of 200-plus allowed, and that was against Baylor. Jalen Redmond, one of the top interior pass rushers in the country, very nimble for 6'3", 279, 8 tackles for loss in 21, 11 in 2019. He didn't play in 2020. They pair him up with Jeffrey Johnson, a transfer from Tulane. His production wasn't off the charts, but he's also slimmed down a good bit from 330 down to 295. But I love this interior defensive line here for the Sooners.
I think Jeffrey Johnson's a very interesting player coming from Tulane. 44 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks last year with the Green Wave. I think he's a nice pickup. I like the way they're going to slot him in there. I also look across this team, and I think that Reggie Grimes is another talented player that has some serious potential. He had 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks last year, 18 total tackles. I like what he can do as well. This is a solid team on the defensive line. I definitely think they're going to improve a little bit.
I do think there's a bit of a fall off on the edge group. Isaiah Coe, another veteran there at nose tackle. So overall in the interior, I think they're pretty straight. But at the edge, Reggie Grimes, top-notch athleticism. It's very interested to see how he's used this fall. Marcus Stripling, senior, has barely played throughout his career. Looks like he's going to be the starter there. Very concerned with this group. Clayton Smith, though he's a former top-end recruit. He's 38th ranked in his class, number 2 defensive end. Good bend off the edge. He plays hard. Good length as well. Off-ball linebacker potentially. He likes to drop these outside linebackers in the coverage, cover the perimeter. Venables does. So we'll see how he's used. Grimes and Smith, very interested to see how those 2 players are going to be used in this scheme. Complex 4-3, 4-2-5 scheme. We'll see what they roll out with this personnel. They're going to want to stop the run, get the safeties down in the box. Does he have the personnel to fit this? We'll see. They also want to play some man coverage. The scheme opens the door for big passing plays, and I think that'll be an area of concern in 2022 because they were 109th in pass defense last year. The responsibilities differ now for these guys, and pass rush might not provide that assist. 135 pass plays of 10-plus yards. That's 120 in college football. So there's a lot of space for these opposing offenses. Playmaking was not present and I guess before we jump into the linebacking core, we'll just go ahead and look at the secondary. Trey Morrison, though, he comes over from North Carolina. He's been working a lot with DB coach Jay Valai. He might be that hybrid DB that Venables likes to use. You've seen Andrew Macumba last year at Clemson just did that. Key Lawrence, he can kind of do the same. Spears Jenkins, he provides length and speed at 6'1", 200. That incoming freshman, he might carve out a role here early. Now, how do you feel about a secondary that I'm really focused on this year? Because guys like Woody Washington and DJ Graham did not play great last year, even though when Woody was healthy, I thought he was probably the best one of all.
Yeah, I like to see Woody Washington step up a little bit, 27 total tackles last year. Maybe he can make a little step forward. I like Spears Jennings, the freshman coming out of high school. I think he has some serious potential. And then Trey Morrison, a good transfer. This was a nice portal work here. This team lost a lot in the portal, but they did make some nice pickups in the portal. I think Trey Morrison's a solid grab. I like to see him sort of take over and be that lead figure in this defense, command that secondary.
At linebacker, Deshaun White, he's a veteran coming back. A big-time ad, TD Roof, Ted's son. He was very productive at Appalachian State. He's going to come over here and probably carve himself out a role. We'll see what happens. I think they're probably going to operate with a 4-2-5. And I think they have two solid linebackers. Danny Stuntsman, he's also going to get some looks for playing time. He's a sophomore. Overall, I'm not blown away with the talent in the middle. We'll see what happens with Brent Venables. How are you expecting some of these guys to be used, mainly in the middle?
Definitely interested to see what Venables does. He has played with different play styles at Clemson. I wonder what he will sort of incorporate here. I like to think a 4-2-5 maybe potentially as well. It's interesting to see what he can do with that. I think the talent may be there, but I just worry about the production that hasn't really been there in the past 2 seasons for this Oklahoma defense, and I get concerned in the Big 12 that they're going to find themselves in deep trouble early on.
Billy Bowman, he might occupy that free safety spot or maybe potentially the nickelback role. I think Trey Morrison, at least on the depth chart I'm looking at, currently occupies that. So Justin Burrell's another senior veteran. They get a lot of guys back. I think they'll certainly improve. The pass rush, though, they're going to have to play key roles as well. Very interested to see how this defense performs, regardless of the result this year for Oklahoma. I think everyone's certainly going to focus on what they can do here because they have some interesting personnel. What will Venables do with them remains to be seen. That's going to be the biggest thing I'm looking forward to this season. Looking at the schedule preview and prediction, we were kind of iffy on the offense, kind of iffy on the defense. We said good things about both units. I think that's going to combine to equal a 10-2 record. I think they're going to be flawless in the back half. They do have tough opponents at Iowa State. That's been a challenge versus Baylor. They host the Pokes at Texas Tech, can be challenging. I have them losing September 17th in Nebraska, though. I alluded to it in the Cornhuskers prediction that this team is going to be rocking that day. It's going to be a big game for Scott Frost. And I think in the trenches wise, Oklahoma might be at a disadvantage. This probably shouldn't be a 10-win team, but the schedule isn't all that tough. Frost is desperate. Casey Thompson who flamed them last year. Nebraska isn't overly talented, but again, I don't think Oklahoma really outmatches them. So I think the defense will play a good game that day. The offense is going to use some balance to beat Oklahoma. That's certainly going to cause some waves, I think, by Oklahoma fans, but I think they lose that game. And I also see them losing to Texas October 8th. Again, I don't know if this team is a 10-win team, but I think that's kind of what I'm looking forward to.
The schedule is poor across the board, so 10 wins is definitely achievable for this team. At Nebraska is tough. They're going to be very hyped there. This is one of the biggest games in Lincoln in a very long time. We have both agreed when we did the Nebraska preview, we agree again today that Oklahoma will lose to Nebraska on September 17th. The trip against Texas in Dallas, always a great rivalry game, neutral site. You never know what's going to really happen there. I definitely think Texas has the edge there as well. I could see them dropping a late game as well. Iowa State at Iowa State, that's a tough one. That's one I'm circling, potentially drop. If I had to go with prediction right now, I'll go 9-3. I think they'll lose to Iowa State on October 29th. But 9-3 in the first season, a bit of a transition year. I think that's not too bad for Oklahoma.
We didn't mention September 24th against Kansas State. That team's really had this Sooners team's number the last couple of years. But I think Venables, he's going to come up with a game plan against that rushing attack of the Wildcats. And I think they're going to be able to slow them down here at home. But again, that's a game they could potentially lose as well because that's a really good football team. But I think Venables will be the difference maker that afternoon. That's going to be it for today, guys. Nick, what are your final thoughts on this team that a lot of people have varying opinions about, and I really like the one we have come together with?
Lincoln Riley certainly had a successful time in Norman. That team became a national championship contender. They made the playoffs under him regularly. Very talented coach, leaves for USC. Brent Venables steps in. I think it's a great fit. Probably the higher the offseason for me. I really like the fit. I think long-term it's a great opportunity for Oklahoma. I think they've built this program to be successful long-term. But in the short term, I expect a bit of a drop in production just because of the transition phase. 9-3 for me this season, which is not a terrible season by any measure. They'll definitely play in a decent bowl game. I like the direction this program's going. I think Venables is a great hire. I just don't see any immediate success for this team as in competing in the playoffs or winning the Big 12, but they will get back there sooner rather than later.
Yep, I agree. Long term, the future is bright for this coaching staff and this program. That's going to be it for today's episode, guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Nick, as always, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
That's going to be it, guys. See you next time.